The kingdom of Aloria slept beneath a sky of black velvet, stitched with cold silver stars. The wind whispered secrets through the jagged mountains, carrying tales of power, curses, and rulers who commanded more than armies, they commanded fear. At the heart of this realm stood the castle of the Alpha King, a fortress of dark stone and jagged spires that seemed to pierce the heavens. Its halls were cold and vast, echoing with whispers of the past and the weight of unseen eyes. The Alpha King himself was a figure of legend and dread. His hair, black as midnight, framed a face both beautiful and terrifying. His eyes, sharp and commanding, could silence a room or ignite it in fury. He was feared not just for his power, but for the ancient curse that clung to his bloodline, a curse that punished those who dared love him too deeply. No one approached him without trembling, for to touch him was to risk death, or worse, madness. Yet, on this night, a stranger came to the castle gates. The figure moved with quiet purpose, cloaked in a robe that hid most of his features. But there was a lightness to his step, a certainty that drew the attention of even the guards. Rumors of travelers arriving in the dead of night were not uncommon. But something about this one felt different. The Alpha King sat on his throne, a massive seat of blackened stone carved with jagged runes. He had sensed the stranger before he arrived, a faint pulse of life unlike any other, warm, defiant, unafraid. A servant whispered in his ear, hesitant to speak the words aloud. "A traveler, at the gates, Your Majesty. He asks for audience." The king's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "Bring him before me." His voice, low and measured, rolled like distant thunder. The hall went silent. Even the torches seemed to flicker in anticipation. The doors opened, and the stranger entered. His eyes, a startling shade of green, swept the hall with quiet confidence. He did not bow, did not tremble. The Alpha King studied him in silence, noting the way he carried himself with a mixture of courage and curiosity, as if he knew the dangers of the place but chose to step forward anyway. The king rose, the movement smooth, like a predator circling its prey. "You should not have come," he said, his voice a warning edged with power. "Touch me, and you'll pay." The stranger's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Then I shall not touch you, unless you wish me to." His words, soft yet daring, hung in the air like a spark over dry kindling. A murmur ran through the courtiers. No one had ever spoken to the Alpha King like that. No one had ever dared approach him without fear. The king's eyes narrowed, studying the stranger as one studies a dangerous game piece. There was something in the way he moved, something in the way he held himself, that made the king's pulse quicken despite himself. "You are bold," the king said, voice low and dangerous. "Or foolish." "Perhaps both. I am neither," the stranger replied calmly. "I am merely curious. I am merely curious." The Alpha King took a step closer, each movement deliberate, filling the hall with the weight of his presence. "Curiosity," he said, "is often punished in this kingdom." His gaze bore into the stranger, a silent test of courage. "Do you know what you risk?" "I do," said the stranger, unflinching. "And yet, I choose to risk it." The tension between them was palpable, thick as the fog that often rolled over the castle walls at night. The courtiers held their breath. The very air seemed charged with the power of the king and the unshakable courage of the stranger. Every step the king took was measured, and every heartbeat seemed to echo like a drum in the silent hall. The Alpha King's lips pressed into a thin line. He studied the stranger, noting the faint warmth of his aura, a light in the cold shadow of the castle. There was no fear, no hesitation. That alone intrigued him. He had ruled this kingdom for decades, and no one had ever looked at him without fear or suspicion. And yet, here was someone who met his gaze, who dared to step into the darkness and challenge it. "Why do you not fear me?" the king asked finally. His voice, though steady, carried the faintest hint of curiosity, a dangerous, forbidden edge. "Because I see what you hide." the stranger said softly. I see the loneliness behind the crown, the weight of the curse you bear. I see the man who yearns for something more than power. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King felt a flicker of something he thought long buried. Vulnerability. He stepped back, uncertain for a heartbeat, then steadied himself. Many have tried to understand me, he said, and all have failed. Few survive the attempt. I am not here to survive, the stranger replied, voice steady, but to stand with you, if you allow me. The king's chest tightened, a strange mix of longing and caution. He knew the truth of the curse. He knew what it could do to those who dared love him, and yet, there was something magnetic about this stranger, something that pulled at the frayed edges of his heart, threatening to unravel the carefully constructed walls he had built over centuries. The courtiers whispered among themselves, unsure whether to intervene or flee. The hall seemed suspended in time, as if holding its breath for what would come next. The stranger took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The Alpha King's eyes flashed with warning. Do not, he began, but the words caught in his throat. The stranger's hand lifted slowly, almost reverently, stopping just short of the king's chest. I do not wish to harm you, he said softly. Only to understand. Only to reach you. For a long moment, neither moved. The tension between them was electric, a collision of power, desire, and forbidden yearning. The Alpha King felt the familiar thrill of danger, the one that came from standing at the edge of the abyss, knowing that a single misstep could destroy everything. Then, with a courage that surprised even himself, the stranger closed the distance. His lips met the Alpha King's in a soft, deliberate kiss, not forceful, not demanding, but full of a strange, unspoken promise. It was a kiss that spoke of defiance, of curiosity, of a desire to bridge the gap between fear and longing. The hall froze. Even the torches seemed to dim in awe. The Alpha King's body tensed, every instinct screaming to push the stranger away, to enforce the warning he had given so many times before. And yet, he did not. Something deep within him, buried beneath centuries of pain and solitude, stirred. The stranger pulled back slightly, just enough to meet the king's gaze. I am not afraid of you, he whispered. I do not intend to flee. I choose this moment. And you, if you will let me. The Alpha King's chest tightened, and for the first time in decades, he felt his carefully controlled world shift. The kiss had broken something. A wall. A rule. A fear. And though his lips still held the memory of the strangers, his mind raced with the consequences. The curse. The power. The danger. You have no idea what you have done, the king said, voice low and rough. Do you understand the risk? I do, the stranger said simply. But some risks are worth taking. The king's eyes, dark and stormy, studied him. There was admiration there, yes, but also a warning, a shadow of pain. Then you may pay for it, he said, though a part of him wondered if he even wanted to enforce it. The stranger smiled faintly, unwavering. Then I will pay, he said, but not with fear, only with truth, with loyalty, and with whatever courage I can summon. The tension in the hall was unbearable. The king, ever vigilant, felt his heartbeat quicken. The stranger had crossed a line, and the consequences would ripple through the kingdom like a storm. And yet, there was a spark in the darkness, a fragile, dangerous light that neither could ignore. As the Alpha King turned away, walking slowly toward the shadows of the throne room, he knew one truth that could not be denied. This stranger had changed something within him, awakened something long buried, and for that, he would pay attention, or he would lose everything. And the stranger, standing alone in the echoing hall, knew he had taken the first step into a dangerous game, one that could end in ruin or redemption, in fire or in love. The night outside deepened, shadows weaving across the castle walls. A storm was coming, one born not of wind or rain, but of hearts daring to defy fear and touch what had been untouchable for centuries. And in the quiet, frozen moment before fate fully intervened, the stranger whispered to himself, barely audible, "I will not turn away. Not now. Not ever." The Alpha King's warning still hung in the air. "Touch me, and you'll pay." But the stranger had already crossed the line, and nothing would ever be the same. The first light of dawn barely touched the jagged peaks around Aloria, but within the walls of the castle, the aftermath of the stranger's boldness lingered like a shadow. The Alpha King paced in the throne room, his dark cloak sweeping across the stone floor, his thoughts a storm he could not quiet. The kiss, the single, daring kiss, haunted him. He had felt it, yes, but more than that, he had felt something he had not known for centuries. A stirring of longing. A warmth that was both frightening and intoxicating. The courtiers whispered endlessly, their voices weaving a tapestry of curiosity, suspicion, and fear. None dared approach him directly about the stranger, though eyes followed every movement of the young man with green eyes, who now wandered freely within the castle. Yet the Alpha King did not order him away. He could not. The very presence of the stranger challenged him, provoked him, and awakened a part of himself that he had long buried beneath duty, power, and the curse. In the cold corridors lined with ancient tapestries and flickering torches, the Alpha King found the stranger waiting. He did not kneel, did not bow. He simply stood, his posture calm, his eyes steady, meeting the king's gaze without fear. "You move too freely for someone who has just dared to break the rules of this place," the king said, his voice low and measured. "Do you not know the danger you court?" "I know exactly what I court," the stranger replied. "And yet, here I stand. I did not come to fear you. I came to understand." The king's eyes flicked toward the stranger, narrowing. There was a weight to his presence, a force that even he could not deny. The walls of the corridors seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with tension, as though the castle itself watched and waited. "You do not understand the curse," the king said finally, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "No one who loves me truly can survive. The walls you see, the guards you pass, they are nothing. It is the blood I carry that kills." The stranger did not flinch. Instead, he stepped closer. "Then let me face it with you," he said softly. "I do not seek to flee. I do not seek to hide. I seek only to stand beside you, whatever the cost." For a moment, the king's heart faltered. He had ruled for decades with strength, cunning, and fear, and yet this man, the one who dared kiss him against his warning, had unraveled centuries of caution in a single motion. He felt drawn to him, yet warned by every instinct that danger lay in the act of attachment. "Do you even know what it means to stand beside me?" the king asked. His words were both challenge and plea. "Do you understand the weight of power, of destiny, of blood that can kill even the closest of companions?" "I understand enough," the stranger said, "and I choose you anyway." The Alpha King felt a tension he had never felt before. He was a ruler, a predator, a legend, and yet this stranger, so calm and fearless, had touched something buried deep within him, the longing to be understood, to be seen, to be more than the shadow of a curse and a crown. The king turned sharply, walking down the corridor, his cloak billowing behind him. The stranger followed without hesitation. Matching his stride, they moved in silence, the kind that spoke louder than words. The walls seemed to hum with anticipation, the torches flickering as if reacting to the tension between them. They reached the courtyard, where frost covered the cobblestones, and the first rays of sunlight reflected off the ice like scattered diamonds. The cold air was sharp, biting, yet it could not chill the fire that had ignited between them. "You tempt me," the king said at last, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "You walk beside me as if fear is meaningless, yet you do not know the storms that follow me." "I do not fear storms," the stranger said quietly. "Not if I am with you." The king stopped abruptly, turning to face him fully. His eyes, dark and stormy, bore into the stranger's with a mixture of anger and longing. "You speak as if this is a game. You have no idea of the blood you flirt with. I know enough to see you. the stranger replied. And that is more than most ever have. For a long moment, silence reigned. The Alpha King wanted to speak, to warn, to command, to push this daring soul away. And yet, something inside him, something raw and human, refused. He could not. A sudden shout from the battlements broke their moment. Guards were running, their movements frantic. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed as he realized the meaning immediately. Someone had dared to breach the outer walls of the castle. The stranger's gaze followed his, calm yet unwavering. "Stay close," the king commanded. "This is not a place for anyone foolish enough to wander unguarded." The stranger inclined his head. "I am not afraid," he said simply. Together, they moved toward the disturbance. The night air was sharp and biting, the stones slick with frost. Shadows stretched long under the torchlight as they approached the outer gate. There, a group of masked intruders had been caught by the guards, struggling and panicked. The Alpha King's presence silenced them instantly. The ground seemed to tremble beneath his authority. "Leave them," the stranger said quietly, observing the scene. "Let us see what is at the heart of this disturbance. There is purpose here beyond simple thievery." The king studied him, his brow furrowed. There was a clarity in the stranger's gaze, a calm in the midst of chaos, that unsettled him. He had expected fear, submission, hesitation. Instead, he saw intelligence, courage, and a strange form of loyalty not demanded, but freely offered. The intruders tried to flee, but the Alpha King moved with a predator's grace, subduing them with minimal effort. The stranger watched, noting the precision, the power, the control, and yet, beneath the surface, he saw the hints of something else: loneliness, sorrow, a desire for connection that even the strongest ruler could not deny. When the threat was quelled, the king turned to the stranger, his dark eyes heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Do you see now?" he asked, voice low. "Do you understand why I warned you?" "I see," the stranger said, "and I still choose to stay. You are not only a king, but a man who carries burdens too heavy to bear alone. And you do not have to." The king's jaw tightened. He wanted to resist, to deny the stirrings of longing and trust that the stranger evoked. Yet he could not. Every word, every glance, every simple presence chipped away at the walls he had built. "You may not realize," the king said finally, "that by standing here, you place yourself in danger. The court will not forgive weakness. The kingdom will not forgive folly. And yet," he trailed off, the storm of his emotions barely contained. "And yet?" the stranger prompted softly. "And yet," the king whispered, "you make me feel alive in a way I thought impossible. You make me human." A silence fell over the courtyard, the wind carrying the distant echo of the mountains. The stranger stepped closer, closing the distance with the careful precision of someone who knew the weight of his choice. "I will not leave," he said simply. "Not now. Not ever." The Alpha King's chest tightened. The frost around them seemed to sharpen, mirroring the tension of their hearts. He wanted to resist, to warn, to push this audacity away. But a part of him, small, fragile, and dangerous, reached out, yearning for connection, for understanding, for something he had denied himself for centuries. The moment hung suspended, like the fragile thread between night and dawn. And then, a scream pierced the air, a cry from the castle gates. A shadow moved too quickly for the eye to follow. Something dangerous approached, unseen but palpable, threatening not only the stranger but the fragile trust forming between them. The Alpha King's hand instinctively moved toward the stranger, gripping him tightly. "Hold fast," he commanded, voice low and fierce. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The stranger's green eyes met his, calm and resolute. "Together," he echoed. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. A storm was rising, not of wind or snow, but of power, desire, and peril. And neither the king nor the stranger could have predicted the trials that awaited them, the enemies who would exploit the bond they had forged, or the darkness that lingered in the shadows, waiting to claim them both. The Alpha King's warning still hung in the air, more urgent than ever. Touch me, and you'll pay. Yet the stranger's touch had already begun to change everything. The castle of Aloria trembled under the weight of an unseen threat. Night had fallen again, and the halls that once seemed solid and eternal now felt fragile, as if the walls themselves feared the darkness lurking beyond. The Alpha King moved with cautious steps, his senses stretched taut like a bowstring, each shadow a possible enemy, each flicker of torchlight a warning. Beside him walked the stranger, the Omega, whose presence was both a comfort and a provocation. The green-eyed traveler had not wavered since the first kiss. He had faced the king's warning, the whispers of the court, and now, the quiet menace pressing against the castle's outer defenses. His courage was unshakable, his loyalty clear, but even he could feel the tension growing, as if the very air sensed the arrival of forces older and darker than either of them. "You feel it, don't you?" the king asked, his voice low, almost a growl. "The weight in the air, the shadows moving where no one stands. This is not a simple threat. This is something older, something hungry." "I feel it," the stranger replied, his voice steady. "But I am not afraid." The king's eyes flicked toward him, a mixture of admiration and warning in their depths. "You should be. The danger you face is not merely physical. It is tied to me, to my blood, to a curse that has haunted my line for centuries. Anyone who loves me, anyone who dares touch me, risks their life. And yet," his voice trailed off, heavy with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. "Yet you still let me stand here," the Omega said softly. "I do not wish to harm you. I only wish to be with you, in whatever way I can." The king's gaze lingered on him, dark and stormy. He had warned the stranger. Yes. He had threatened him. He had reminded him of the curse. And yet, the stranger had not fled. He had not bowed. He had not begged for mercy. He had simply chosen to stand beside him despite the danger, despite the unknown, despite the centuries of warnings etched into the castle stones and the king's own heart. The Alpha King's chest tightened. He could feel the pull of the stranger, a magnetic force that both frightened and thrilled him. Every instinct told him to push the man away, to protect him from the inevitable consequences of loving someone cursed. And yet, a deeper, more dangerous part of him, the part that had been dormant for centuries, stirred to life. "You do not understand," the king said finally, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "The curse is not a story for fear. It is real. It haunts my blood. It kills anyone who dares love me too deeply. You could die simply by wanting to be near me." "I know," the stranger said quietly, "and I accept it. I will not leave. Not now. Not ever." The king stared at him. And for a moment, the shadows seemed to grow heavier, wrapping around them both. The wind howled through the courtyard outside, rattling the stone doors, as if the castle itself were warning them. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, frost forming on the floor despite the torches burning brightly. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, moving as though alive. The stranger stiffened slightly, sensing the presence of something beyond the mortal realm. "It has begun," the king whispered, his voice tight with tension. "The curse awakens when the heart dares defy it. And you have touched me." The stranger stepped closer, unafraid. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. The king's eyes narrowed. He wanted to resist, to push the Omega away, to protect him from the unseen forces converging on the castle. And yet, he could not. Something in the stranger's gaze, steady and unwavering, demanded his trust, demanded his vulnerability. The shadows shifted, condensing into shapes that were almost human, almost animal, but entirely otherworldly. The king raised his hand, invoking a power that had lain dormant for centuries. The air around them crackled with energy, frost forming patterns like veins of silver across the stone floor. "Stay behind me," the king commanded, his voice commanding and protective. "This is my fight. You are not meant to face this. I face it because you face it," the stranger replied. "I will not run. I will not hide. Not from you, not from this." The king's eyes darkened with a mixture of pride and fear. He had ruled Eloria with unmatched strength, feared for the power he wielded. And yet, for the first time, he felt that strength threatened not by an enemy, but by the intensity of his own heart. The shadows surged forward, coalescing into monstrous forms with glowing eyes and jagged limbs. They moved with intent, circling, testing, probing the defenses of both man and castle. The king's power flared, a wave of force that pushed them back, but the creatures were relentless. The stranger did not flee. He stood firm, meeting the king's gaze. "I trust you," he said. "Lead me through this." The king felt a jolt of emotion at the words, trust, pure and unbroken. It was a rarity in his long life, a gift few had ever given him. He reached out, grasping the stranger's hand with a grip that was both protective and possessive. The touch was electric, a spark that ignited the frost-laden air around them. "Then hold on," the king said, "and do not let go." The shadows attacked in waves, a relentless storm of darkness. The king moved like a force of nature, his strikes precise and devastating, his power bending the very air around him. The stranger followed, staying close, ready to assist, ready to shield, ready to endure whatever came. Their movements were synchronized, instinctive, a dance forged in danger and trust. As the battle raged, the king realized something he had not expected. The stranger's courage, his unwavering loyalty, and his willingness to face the curse were strengthening him, not physically, but emotionally. The king's fear of the curse, of loss, of vulnerability, it began to ebb, replaced by something new, the possibility of connection, of hope, of love that did not destroy but transformed. Finally, the last shadow dissipated, retreating into the corners of the castle as if unwilling to linger against such defiance. The air was still, frost glinting in the torchlight, and the king lowered his hands, his chest heaving. The stranger remained at his side, unshaken, resolute. He met the king's eyes, and in that gaze was a silent promise. "I will not leave. I will not fear. I will stand with you." The king felt a warmth he had not felt in centuries, a light in the darkness that was as dangerous as it was beautiful. He wanted to speak, to confess, to warn, to claim, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he simply held the stranger close, letting the warmth of his presence fill the cold void that had haunted him for so long. "I should have pushed you away," the king whispered finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have protected you from me, and yet you did not," the stranger said softly. "And that is why I am here. Why I chose this. Why I stay." The king's heart clenched. He knew the danger was far from over. The curse would not be silenced so easily. There would be trials, betrayals, enemies lurking in the shadows, and forces beyond both their understanding. Yet, in that moment, he allowed himself to hope, to feel, to trust. The Omega leaned closer, brushing a hand along the king's arm. "Whatever comes," he said quietly, "we face it together." The king's dark eyes softened, and for the first time in centuries, he let himself believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for redemption, not of his kingdom, but of himself. The wind howled through the castle, rattling the doors and windows. The frost glimmered like silver veins across the stone, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stir with unseen intent. The curse had not been defeated. It had only awakened further, drawn by the bond between Alpha and Omega, by the courage and defiance that the stranger embodied. The king and the stranger stood together, hands clasped, hearts aligned against the unknown. The storm of the curse waited, patient, watching, knowing that the dance had only just begun. And in that moment, the Alpha King realized a truth he could no longer deny. Love, even in the shadow of a curse, was a force that could not be ignored and perhaps could not be contained. The storm raged outside the walls of Aloria, a tempest of wind and snow. Yet within the castle, the tension between the Alpha King and the Omega burned hotter than any fire. Shadows writhed along the walls like living creatures, drawn by the bond that had formed between them, the bond that awakened the ancient curse. Every stone in the castle seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the very air knew that tonight, destiny would be rewritten. The Alpha King stood in the grand hall, his black cloak billowing, his eyes dark and fierce. The weight of centuries pressed on him, not the weight of the crown, but of the curse. A relentless force that demanded isolation and fear. And yet, beside him, the Omega moved with calm determination, green eyes steady, unshaken by the danger that pulsed through the castle. "You should not be here," the king said, his voice a low growl. "This is my fight. The curse is mine to bear. If you remain, you risk everything: your life, your mind, your soul." "I am here because of you," the Omega replied softly, "and I accept the risk. I will not flee. I will not hide. I will face whatever comes." "Beside you." The king's chest tightened. He had ruled for decades with power and fear, yet he had never encountered loyalty like this, courage like this, love like this. The very presence of the Omega challenged him, provoked him, and stirred emotions he had buried beneath the weight of duty and the curse. He wanted to protect the man, to push him away, yet he also wanted to reach for him, to claim this fragile, dangerous connection that had awakened in the shadows of his heart. The castle doors shuddered under the force of the storm outside. Shadows coalesced, taking shape into monstrous forms, creatures born of the curse, hungry for fear and chaos. Their eyes glowed with cold fire, their limbs twisted and unnatural, their movements silent yet deadly. The Alpha King's power flared, a pulse of energy that rippled through the hall, holding the creatures at bay, yet he knew this would not last. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice sharp and protective. "Whatever comes, do not leave my side." The Omega nodded, stepping forward, his hand brushing against the king's. The touch sent a spark through the cold air, a connection that strengthened them both. "I am not afraid," he said. "I am with you, always." The king's eyes softened for a fleeting moment. He had never allowed himself to feel this way, never allowed trust, never allowed hope. And now, standing here with the stranger who had dared to kiss him, who had dared to defy him, he felt a shift within himself, a transformation that was as frightening as it was exhilarating. The creatures surged, their movements like liquid shadow. The king raised his hands, channeling his power into a force that bent the air, froze the frost, and pushed the monsters back. Yet the creatures were relentless, adapting, striking from every corner, feeding off the tension and fear that lingered in the room. The Omega stepped closer, placing a hand on the king's arm. "Together," he said, "you and I, together, we are stronger than they are." The king's chest heaved. He had ruled with strength and fear, but he had never ruled with trust, with partnership, with love. And yet, the warmth of the Omega's hand, the certainty in his eyes, reminded him that he was not alone, not anymore. The king extended his other hand, intertwining his fingers with the Omega's. A wave of energy pulsed from the connection, stronger than any spell, stronger than any force the castle had ever known. The shadows shrieked, recoiling from the unexpected unity of heart and power. The Alpha King's roar echoed through the hall, a mixture of fury, relief, and newfound hope. And the Omega's steady presence anchored him, giving him strength he had never imagined. The creatures faltered, weakened by the bond they had not anticipated. With precise, controlled movements, the king struck, bending shadows, twisting frost, channeling power into a force that was no longer fueled by fear, but by connection, by trust, by love. The Omega moved with him, mirroring his actions, reinforcing the king's power with calm determination, guiding the flow, protecting the vulnerable points, facing danger without hesitation. Together, they became a force that neither the curse nor the creatures could break. The air shimmered with frost and shadow, energy bending to their will, until finally the last monster dissolved into mist, leaving the hall silent except for the storm outside. The king sank to one knee, exhaustion coursing through him. Yet his hands still held the Omegas. The bond between them was stronger than it had ever been. A tether of courage, trust, and unspoken longing. He looked up, dark eyes softening as he met the green gaze that had refused to waver through every danger. "You stood by me," he whispered, voice rough but tender. "You did not run. You did not fear. And you—" He paused, struggling to find words for centuries of pain and solitude. "You made me feel human." The Omega smiled faintly, brushing a hand across the king's cheek. "You are human," he said softly. "Even a king, even cursed, even feared. And you deserve to feel, to trust, to love. I chose to be with you, because I see you, and I accept you. All of you." The Alpha King felt something long buried awaken, a warmth that chased away centuries of loneliness. A light that shone through the cold shadow of his heart. He had expected fear, betrayal, loss. Instead, he found hope, courage, and the possibility of redemption. He rose, lifting the Omega in a protective embrace. "Then we face everything," he said, voice low and determined. "Together. No force, no curse, no enemy can break what we have forged tonight." The Omega nodded, pressing close. "Together," he echoed. "Always." Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind howling its last warnings before quieting, the frost glinting like diamonds under the pale light of a rising moon. The castle seemed to breathe, as though relieved that the darkness had been held at bay. If only for a time. The king and the Omega stood in the center of the hall, hands intertwined, hearts beating in unison. The curse had not been destroyed, it never could be entirely, but its hold had been challenged, weakened, transformed by the strength of their bond. Where fear had once reigned, hope now flickered. Where loneliness had dwelled, trust now thrived. The Alpha King's dark eyes softened as he looked at the Omega, a rare smile breaking the sternness of his features. "You may have risked everything to stand with me," he said, "and yet, I cannot imagine standing without you." The Omega's green eyes shimmered with quiet emotion. "And you will not have to," he said. "Not now. Not ever." For the first time in centuries, the Alpha King allowed himself to believe that love could exist, even within the shadows of a curse. Even within the walls of a kingdom built on fear, he allowed himself to believe that connection, trust, and courage could transform not just him, but the very world he ruled. The storm outside had passed, leaving the castle bathed in a pale, serene light. Frost clung to the stone like silver lace, and the shadows, though still present, no longer seemed threatening. The Alpha King and the Omega stood together, facing the future uncertain, dangerous, yet full of possibility. The king drew the Omega close, their foreheads touching, breath mingling, hearts aligned. "Touch me, and we survive," he whispered. A promise, rather than a warning. The Omega smiled, pressing closer. "We survive," he agreed. "And we thrive." For the first time, the Alpha King felt the weight of the curse lessen. Not gone, but tempered by the strength of love, trust, and the courage of the Omega, who had refused to turn away. The bond between them had transformed danger into power, fear into connection, and loneliness into companionship. And in the quiet aftermath, with the frost glimmering and the shadows retreating, The Alpha King and the Omega understood a truth more profound than any prophecy, stronger than any curse. Some bonds cannot be broken, some love cannot be denied, and some destinies are meant to be shared. The castle of Eloria would face many storms in the years to come, as it always had. But the king would no longer face them alone. And neither would the Omega. The darkness had tested them. The curse had sought to claim them. Yet together, they had transformed the night into dawn, fear into courage, and isolation into connection. And for the first time in a long, long age, the Alpha King allowed himself to hope not just for survival, but for love, for redemption, and for a future that he and the Omega would shape together. And as they stood in the center of the hall, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, the Alpha King whispered one last, tender promise. Touch me, and you will always have me. The Omega pressed close, and in that embrace, the shadows of the past finally began to fade.